Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have the function group TEFISINE, and we'll be comparing and contrasting these four types. So Ryan, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Hi, I'm Ryan. I run a personality blogging website with my partner Mara called PracticalTyping. I'm a ISTJ, as you can see on the panel right there.
Excellent. And so Amy?
Hi, my name is Amy Pluth. I can be found on Twitter at that hashtag, and I've been into type for about 3 years, and I love doing these.
Very cool, me too. And Hilary?
Hi, I'm Hilary. I'm an INFP. I don't work in the type world, but I learned about type through Heidi Priebe, who's my best friend that I've known for many years now. How many years now? 10, 12 years? I can't remember at this point. But everything I know about type is through Heidi. So,
yeah.
That brings us to me. So I'm Heidi Priebe. I do a lot of writing and also run personal development programs for ENFPs and INFPs. And I'm an ENFP, as you can see in my name.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And my name is Joyce, and I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, and I facilitate the instrument in organizations. Heidi Priebe is a book author of books like this ENFP Survival Guide, and she has boot camps on her website. So definitely go check that out. Also, Ryan has a website called PracticalTyping. If you want to have like the vague Jungian concepts distilled into very practical, concise, and clear ways, go visit Ryan's site, PracticalTyping, and go visit Heidi for some boot camps if you want to get in shape and mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually with the one and only Heidi Priebe. Amy, the ESTJ, has a Twitter handle, and Hilary is a very cool friend of Heidi's.
the same.
Yes, go check out those websites and those people. and so my first question for everyone is, what are some obvious differences you see between all of your types? What makes an ISTJ different than an ENFP, and what makes an ESTJ different than an INFP?
Well, I hate to be the ISTJ of the group and kick it off with the obvious. The order of the cognitive functions is what makes the difference, but the ordering is pretty much what makes you either a judger or a perceiver. And I have a feeling that that is going to be one of the biggest differences between the J's and the P's is how they decide to organize and live their life. I have a couple ENFP friends myself, and they like to live in a state of what I consider absolute chaos. I don't like to live my life like that, so I would say that would probably be the number one difference from my point of view.
I can back that up. I love chaos. Hit me with it. But I would say, like, the ISTJ I see as someone who lives extremely pragmatically. And I think having that, like having SI and TE in my stacking means I can kind of access pragmatism when I need to, and I can set up systems in my favor when I need to, but it exhausts me to do it consistently. So it's like whenever, and you know, ISTJ and ENFP are the kind of inside out versions of each other. So they have all the same functions in the complete opposite order. So it's kind of like looking at your shadow self in some ways when I meet an ISTJ, because I'm like, oh, I get it. Like everything you're doing makes total and complete sense to me, but I'm going to do the complete opposite thing. And in a way, I'm sure, like Ryan, that makes sense to you as well. Like you can see what I'm doing, yeah. But it's just like we wouldn't make the same choices. So it's a really interesting like comparison.
Yeah, I find as a ESTJ that INFPs, I can follow what they're doing. I won't say I follow their logic, but you know, I can follow what they're doing. But it's usually in a sense in the areas where we agree to disagree. It's a lot of times easier to follow their lead that way in an area I consider a agree to disagree area than it is to try and work too hard on meshing the two of them. Like, you know, it's just like, okay, no, we're going to do these things that way. We're going to do these things this way and work around it, because as much as people may consider ESTJs stubborn as I'll get out, INFPs are actually more like when you really, really get down to like there's a lot of things my husband will flex on. He's an INFP, but when he gets stubborn, he definitely out-stubborns me. So that's how that works.
Yeah, I suppose INFPs can be stubborn. I mean, we do have FI, and we hold our ideals very like close to our heart. And I think, is that what you mean about stubbornness?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I agree to that. Yeah, in terms of my experience with ESTJs, I know a lot of ESTJs, and I really, honestly, I admire them because they have my last function, TE, they have it first. And I don't, I struggle with my TE. And I want to work on developing it so that I can be more organized and get projects done and actually complete things.
Yeah.
Use my time wisely. So I actually learn a lot through interacting with ESTJs. Having said that, I do over time, it is hard for me because like I get exhausted because I can't relate with my TE that much. You know what I mean? But I do appreciate their sense of humor and their like conviction. Like they're very, yeah, they go after things and get stuff done. I think I just admire that as an INFP who's more like starts some projects, leaves them, forgets about things. Like, you know.
I have to admit, I love an INFP's sense of vision with things because ESTJs, we do think long term, but not all that long term. So like the big overarching plans, and there are 5 things that are hard for me to figure out. So like outsourcing that is very helpful. But I would say that too many INFPs, and it gets rather confusing for me. Like I can't handle too many different FI perspectives going on. Like my sense of how many I can deal with is limited. So like I'm not going to go around gathering a whole bunch of them like in my really close circle because that would be hard for me to juggle. You know, I could juggle a whole bunch of other types a lot more than I could necessarily juggle that, but I do find it very cool to have some of those in my sphere.
Hilary and I have a close friend who's an ESFP, and she's always like, yeah, when I'm hanging out with you guys individually, it's cool, but then when you get together, I just zone out because it's too much.
I don't blame her because if I put myself in her shoes, I would completely feel the same way. Like, yeah, I'm around like a bunch of S's who are using SE, for example, a lot. Like, I can't. Like, I just after a while,
keep up. Yeah.
I can't keep up.
Yeah. It's like there's too many opinions and they're like different, and I'm trying to find a way to unify them, and they just won't because they're all just too strongly inherent into different people. And then I'm like, okay, I'm done. I got to pick which one of you I'm rooting for. Like, so who's going to win here? Because only, you know, I can only root for so many before this is all going to go down, and then I'm going to like go after somebody once I pick whose side I'm on. So, and that's never good.
I like how it sounds like it's always just like an ideological war when you're around NFPs.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to be, but like if there's too many of them, that's what I'm like. That's where it would get like 1 or 2. No, we're fine. We probably can figure out simpatico and not struggle about that kind of stuff. But I'm like too many of those, and I probably end up with trouble.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So I guess maybe we could all go through all of our functions in order, and then we can see what we relate on and what we disagree, what is different between all of us. Brian, could you describe SI in the dominant disposition in your experience, how it feels like, and maybe we can all compare it to each other's experience of SI. Mm-hmm.
SI for me in the dominant position leads to a lot of sitting there and basically absorbing a bunch of information all the time. That's the best way that I can think of to actually describe it. It's like I can't go 2 seconds without pretty much replaying the last couple of seconds in my head and noticing this and that and the other thing. That's just kind of how I exist with SI in the dominant slot. I don't know how relatable that is going down the stack, but I have a feeling that it's probably a little bit more over the top being a dominant function. That seems to be what I've noticed is whatever your dominant function is, it seems like it's kind of domineering everything else, and everything else is kind of coming second to that.
Cool. So what is everyone else's experience of SI?
I have SI in the second slot. So for me, it's my reference when I'm doing things. Like, I'm always doing things or going for something because I just react to everything. But SI is my control function on like how I'm going to react. Like, I'm going to do something and maybe I've made a plan, but then I'm going to check my SI and go, okay, what was the last plan I used that was successful, or which one catastrophically failed, and I'm going to do something, 180 from that. And so it's my quick reference back inside, but I don't tend to sit there very long. I tend to go there frequently, I'd say. But that's because I think my catalog file of everything I associate with SI is pretty close and intact, like right here at my fingertips. So I don't have to spend a whole lot of time searching through it to find what I'm looking for. And then I'm back out and I'm going again with whatever I have to do. So
Hilary and I have lived together like on and off for, I don't know, 10 years now. It's like, I can describe your SI.
I use SI to set up a life for myself that's comfortable. So I use it sometimes like as a crutch. If I'm not doing well, I'll go to things in my life that are kind of like nostalgic. And how do you describe it? I don't know. I'm not doing a good job.
Like, no, you're describing it. Like, yeah, I see you using a lot in terms of like leaning on rituals that you have, or like routines you've set up for yourself, and being really determined to like keep those going. Not like consistent routines the way like, higher stack SI users usually use it, but kind of like when you're stressed out, you like things to be a very certain way, and you kind of find comfort in like certain items and like certain routines. Like, I see that very present for you.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. Sometimes it's a healthy thing. Like I wake up in the morning and I have the same mug that I use every day, and I have my coffee, and I have like these little routines that make me feel very comfortable and, set me up for success. But then sometimes it can work against me. So I'll get too nitpicky about certain things, and that would be my SI. That would be me using my SI in an unhealthy way. Like, things have to be just a certain way, or I can't, move on. Like that would be like an unhealthy thing that I do sometimes. But it's good and bad for me.
Yeah, it's like if it's the lower down you get the functions, the more neurotic and strange they get. So it's
I can get neurotic with it.
Yeah, it's same. Like, it's like SI comes and goes in bursts for me as someone who has it in the inferior position. So it's like, for a while, I can get super into routines and be like, if I'm in a routine, I am so in it. Like, nothing can stop me from doing my routine if I'm like in a certain place in my life where I'm like, this is what I want. Like, I'll have the same day 100 times in a row, and then I'll never have that day again. Like, that's how SI works for me. It's like, for a while, I'll just do things with absolutely no schedule or routine. And I'll live like that for a while, and then I'll get stressed out by that. And then it's like, okay, now it's half a year of like, every day is the same. But then like then Groundhog Day is over for good, and that same day is never coming back. So it's like spurts of intense focus on FI or SI, and then complete neglect. But when I'm using it healthily, it's about like reflecting and like being able to learn from my experiences. And sometimes it feels very nice. It kind of feels like digesting food. Like, it's like all the ideas and experiences I'm pulling in with NE, I can then like give to SI to kind of like over time digest and form some like thoughts and opinions and standards for like how I want to live my life. So I think the older I get, the more I start to see that happening in a healthier way.
I remember Ryan telling me about how the inferior function is like an all or nothing function. So like, Heidi, you're saying you either do it like 100 days in a row and then forget about it. So that sounded like an all or nothing. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. And so, Ryan, would you like to describe your TE in your experience, how it's like? And maybe we can compare and contrast.
TE for me is honestly, it's kind of like literally the flip of what Amy just described, what her SI was for her. It's kind of like the same idea with my TE. It's like, it's right there, and I can use it, and it's just kind of like on hold for waiting for me to just kind of like go into TE mode and just get something done. Because with SI in the dominant slot, I'm primarily wanting to just kind of absorb information. So I'm kind of more in a state of inaction by default. So the TE is just kind of there on standby. So for me, it's just kind of I can use it, and I can use it pretty decently. I mean, at least I think I can use it pretty decently. But yeah, it helps me get my goals completed is more or less how I look at it. It helps me have the structure to the SI system, more or less. So my SI wants things to be a certain way, and then TE is what helps me actually get that out into the real world and actually get it done.
For TE is my my motivation for everything and my unifier of my world. Like, I am a very tribe-oriented person, and TE is my way of we're all in this together, type thing. So it's the get up and go. It's the way I'm going to view things. Like, I like to describe TE as I have a math background. I'm a math teacher by trade as well as a history teacher. So it's the ability to put everything I want into separate variables to get the answer I want. And everything from emotions to time to goals and everything are all separate pieces that I adjust to get the end result equation I want out of my life. And I'm always juggling lots of different things to try and get the best out of, different results, whatever I deem is the most important result for the moment, that we're looking for. So it's where I reside most of the time. So most of the time I am residing in my outer world, and it's something I usually either have something to do or an opinion to have or an auto response feature. It really sometimes is an auto response feature. It's like I'm presented with something and I have an automatic response, and I can tell you right now what my automatic response is to whatever the stimuli coming at me is. I have this automatic response system, and it's just involuntary, and it happens all the time. And I think a lot of times I come across as a bit more of a know-it-all than I really think this is what I know right now, but some people think I'll never change my opinion. And it's like, well, no, that's not really, give me a reason to change the variables. I will, but it's very much how I see things.
Cool. I have TE last. Yeah, I don't know. In my opinion, I feel like I have an underdeveloped TE. I would like to develop it more. But in my experience, I relate to the all or nothing comment you guys made earlier about the inferior function. I find when I use TE, I just kind of go for it, and it's almost like defensive. I don't know, because I'm not like that logical. So when I'm using it, I don't want to say I come off as like aggressive, but I'm very like stubborn in it. I'm like, no, this is the right way to do it, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I don't really want outside feedback, because I'm like, no, this is my TE. I know what's going on, and we're going to get this done. So that's kind of my experience with it. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Yeah. Doesn't come out often.
Yeah, so I have T third. And for me, it's kind of like, okay, TE is like a friends with benefits situation for me. Usually we're like acquainted and we're cool with each other, but we're just kind of like letting each other do our own thing. And then it's like when we get together, it's incredible. Like it's like when TE kind of activates for me is when I feel really strongly about something that I want to do. And it's like, I call it like kind of the fusion of FI and TE is like taking meaningful action. So it's like if my FI doesn't know what it wants, my TE is completely dormant. Like I will just be a completely disorganized human being gladly. It doesn't bother me. But when I want something, like right now, for example, like I'm working on a bunch of projects and it's like I'm hyper organized and I love it. I love being hyper organized when I feel like what I'm working on is really meaningful, but that has to be there. So it's kind of like TE, I can use when I need to use it, but I need to have a reason to use it. It won't just come out on its own. Like I don't organize for organization's sake, but it's a resource that I can access when I need it. So I love TE in my psyche. Like our tertiary function is often kind of that aspirational one where I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of myself when I'm using it. Sort of like it, but I don't use it unless I have a reason to. Like it can be absent for a long time, and it doesn't bother me that it's gone. It bothers me that maybe my introverted feeling isn't healthy at that time. But the absence of TE, it's like, I can kind of live with some disorganization and disorganized thoughts until I have a reason not to.
So I found something that Amy said kind of interesting. When you talked about TE in the lead spot, you talked about it being like really tribe oriented for you. I wonder how that actually reflects toward all the different spots, because I mean, I technically, as having TE in the aux spot, you would think that I would be the second most tribe oriented, but I don't honestly view myself as that tribe oriented. I really have kind of been more of a solo act for the most part. Like I have one or two other people maybe, but I'm not like really into groups or the group mentality. I'd rather just kind of be off doing my own thing. So I wonder if there's like a split between the introverts and the extroverts, or if it's just kind of one of those things that varies from person to person.
I think some of it has to do with, do you know where your place is in the tribe though? It being your aux function, like you kind of know, this is what I do with the tribe. This is my role. This is my thing. You know, do you know that for yourself, Ryan?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you consider like job wise, yes, because I usually fall into a certain role because I'm a doer, secondly. So when I am in a group, I usually find something to do. So I'm usually tasked with, I'm taking care of this or I'm taking care of that, and I just kind of take that and run with it. Don't really do a lot of networking with other people when I'm doing it per se. If I can do it by myself, I prefer to do it by myself. But yeah,
I would hazard to say that for Heidi and Hilary, that their sense of who they are probably comes first for them over how they maybe their place in the tribe or how they interact with the tribe. And so I think being tribe focused has more to do with being an TE or FE Dom. Like that's like very obviously different. Those people are very, very highly tribe focused. I think your tribe focused people that are not as emotionally aware are probably your TE Doms, and your tribe focused people that can read the room and the nuances better are probably more your FE Doms, would be what I'd hazard to say. Because like there are some things about the room I can read. I can read basic levels of joyfulness and stuff like that, and I can read who's crushing on who, but outside of that, I'm not always that great at figuring out like emotional states of everybody else going on. But I am pretty good at like, you know, seeing that, you know, there is an obvious technical problem that is interfering with the group, you know, technical problem. I see this technical problem bothering the group and I am going to fix this technical problem. Like, and sometimes the technical problem is emotions and I will try my best to fix that. But that often comes across as a sledgehammer to a lot of other types. And in my method of dealing with it, and it's one of those, the older I get and the more I'm around other people, that becomes better refined, you know. So it's not quite so much of a sledgehammer result when dealing with those, but I think that's one of the differences there.
So what say you, Heidi? Group oriented or not group oriented?
I'm wildly group oriented. My entire life, like I'm only happy if I'm in some sort of community that feels like very meaningful to me, and I feel like I have a place there, and I also feel like other people have a place there. So it's interesting because like I actually really do see the role of TE in that, especially if I'm in any sort of like leadership position within the group, I'm always very aware of like how certain interactions are going to happen or like are more likely to play out based on kind of how people are positioned and all the factors that go into like this person's interaction with this person. So even like running a lot of group coaching sessions, right? Like the strategy behind who do you put in breakout rooms on Zoom, like who speaks after who in order to make sure that like the kind of emotional atmosphere stays cohesive, I think is all very TE. And it's also like, it's fun for my NE to think about that, but it's TE that really like structures it in a way that's cohesive. So I definitely see how having that as your first function would very much allot you the ability to do that very well. And it's interesting because, Amy, a lot of what you say, I have an ESTJ brother, and it's very reminiscent of him. Like a lot of what you say reminds me of him. And I think it's an underrated trait of TE dominance, is the ability to kind of have the pulse on like, not the emotional atmosphere, but kind of the cohesion of people and how they're going to fit together, how certain things are going to like impact how people behave. So there's a really strong, almost like awareness of how situations need to get orchestrated interpersonally with TE doms that I don't think we give them enough credit for. Like it's a very, it seems to be very natural for a lot of you guys.
Yeah. And it's definitely, I've noticed for female ESTJs in particular, it's because of the expectation that we're probably ESFJs. We frantically learn this at a young age or start copying other ESFJs on how to do that, because it's just the defense mechanism of dealing with it. Because after you have enough blow-ups and burnouts with other people who are expecting otherwise, you just frantically start clawing at anything that will like improve your senses in that area. And I enjoy being around people all the time. I hate to be alone, and you know, but it comes out a little differently than a lot of people expect.
Hilary, you're pretty tribe oriented, I feel like.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I would say I'm very tribe oriented. Like I feel the most comfortable when I'm involved in a community. I don't always have to be like actively like, because I am still an introvert, so I do need that space to be in my FI, but I really get so much value out of being a part of a community. And I like knowing my place in the community and how I'm supporting the team and how they're supporting me. And I feel my best when I'm a part of a group like that.
It's interesting. I like the way that TE and NE interplay with each other, especially in the extroverts, because I've worked under an ENFP, and that was honestly one of the best experiences I ever had, because as a leader, the ENFP had a lot of flexibility, which I guess you would expect from the ENFP, but that gave me a place basically to step into like almost like advisory position basically. So he'd get a great idea and he'd start running with it. And then he might not have had like a ton of focus on where exactly he wanted to go, but then I could have input and basically go, hey, you know, if we went this way with it, I think that would be a really good idea. I think it would help and it would work out great if we went over here. And it just was very synergistic between having like an ENFP with an ISTJ kind of just playing kind of like a support role. Because as an ISTJ, I really don't like to be in leadership positions, like unless I absolutely have to, and I can do it and it's not a problem, but like I don't prefer it. I don't really want to be in a leader position if I don't have to be. I'd much rather just kind of be like throwing out thoughts and be like, hey, you know, if you did this, it'd probably work a little better, or if you go this way, that probably be a good idea, or if you organize this, that would probably help, kind of thing. And that's just where I'm happiest with my preferences. And it's kind of the same thing with ESTJs to a degree. I mean, I haven't worked under an ESTJ, but I've seen one in the lead position before. And I don't think ESTJs get enough credit when they're in leadership, because this guy was hilarious. Like, he wasn't like one of those extremely stick in the mud, like you think ESTJs always are, where they just like have no sense of humor, just don't laugh, they don't put up with anything. Now he had like a great sense of humor, and you could really see that tertiary NE coming out in him. Like, obviously he didn't play around when you needed to get stuff done, but like when things were getting done, you could see a lot of that NE actually coming out. It was really, really amusing.
Yeah, I wonder if people with the same functions, I've never really thought about this, but like work better together. And I don't have enough experience with like all the different types to even say who I feel like I work better and worse with based on type. Like a lot of other factors come into play. But I could see working with STJs going very, very well, because it's kind of like they fill in, like we would fill in each other's blind spots, but in a way that's communicatable. So it's not so forward that I'm like, I don't understand why you're even suggesting this, which I feel like is truly sometimes the case with functions that I don't prefer. So I can see it going well.
Yeah. I know my husband talks about the fact that we have 4 kids, and he goes, you're really great for them right now while they're little. You know, they need boxes. They need to learn all this like very concrete formal stuff. He goes, when they get like teens and preteens and they've got all these questions and these metaphysical questions and these raging hormones and all this stuff, he goes, that's when I will shine. And I'm like, yes, because some of those questions will drive me batty because I'll answer them, and then I want to give you like, here's your concrete answer, do this, and they're still like going through all this other stuff, and I'm like, I know I'll be tapping out, you know, at that point. And I'm like, yes, this will be a great sense of balance between the two of us of, okay, let me kind of take the lead right now, and then we'll transition a little bit more later towards, you know, like you can have this long question about, you know, morality and ethics and all these other things, because I've joked with people, I'm like, by 12, I need my kid to like take baths, at least know to do their homework, even if they know to ask for help, you know, help with chores, doing all this stuff, because I need time at that point to deal with all these other thoughts that they have. And if I'm still dealing with making you take a bath, like we will not have time to deal with these questions. So like, I need to get my job done now so that we have time to like answer these questions for you when you're older, because if you don't get them answered, then, you know, it's going to be harder for you, like somebody, or even just time to empathize with you, you know, when you're older of, you know, yeah, your friends were stupid, or teacher was hard, or, you know, this disappointment happened, and how do we deal, you know, how do we keep going? I'm like, I won't have time for that if I'm still like, you know, pressing you to clean your room and, you know, do your homework and stuff like that. You know, that's not what I want to be doing at that point, you know, in your life. I've got other things I would rather be doing with your life at that point.
Yeah, that's really fascinating about like how you guys cover each other's blind spots, and you guys appreciate like how, you know, you guys can fill in for that.
Yeah, I related to that as well. Like I work on a pretty big team, and there are a lot of like ESTJs and ISTJs, and I find that I work really well with them because I feel like I understand their motivations, and when they make a decision, I'm like, oh yes, like that makes sense, and I get that. And then when I, you know, contrast that with some of my other coworkers, I work with a lot of ESFJs as well, and they lead with their FE. And while I know about FE, and I think I understand it a little bit, I don't have it. And sometimes when they're making decisions, I just have a hard time understanding like their logic and why they made that decision. It's harder for me to follow. So yeah, I think it really helps a lot to have the same functions, even if we're in a different order.
For sure. And now I'm wondering, where's the friction between your types then? Because you guys love a lot about each other. So is there any differences you see?
Sorry, just so we don't forget, we didn't do NE or FI in our slots, but we can come back to that later. So
for sure. So I guess we'll talk about friction, and then we'll go back to Ryan's functions.
Without question, for me, it's when they lack to pay attention to the details. That is when I get into friction with NFPs particularly. I haven't actually dealt with a lot of ESTJs in person, but I suspect it would be similar with them, honestly, because they are more prone to lead with an action versus lead with an observation. So I think probably across the board, my friction with the other three is probably going to have to do with, I want to sit here and look at all these details before we get started so that you don't have to backtrack. And I have a feeling the other ones kind of have more of a tendency to just, oh, it'll be fine. We'll figure it out when we get there, kind of thing. So that's would be my guess.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost like I was raised by an ISTJ, like my father was an ISTJ. So I'm like, I'm so aware of where friction could happen that I almost feel like in my life, I've just not ever gone in the direction of working with ISTJs, because I'm like, I had so many experiences growing up where there was just so much conflict that I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna not make life harder on either of us. But it's nothing against ISTJs. It's just like I think I'm hyper aware of that. But it's interesting because of that. It's like the ISTJ friends I have. I feel like I'm able to like we're kind of able to find a middle ground very easily because I think I am kind of hyper aware. I also have an ESTJ brother, so there was such STJ energy in my house that I'm like, I kind of get how this works. So if we have like a surface level relationship or we know each other like a medium amount, we don't really piss each other off because I kind of get it. But I think if I were working towards a common goal with like an ISTJ, I think they would feel exactly what Ryan said. They would feel very frustrated by me not paying attention to the details. And then, or like not focusing on them. Like I can know they're there, but it doesn't mean like I focus on the details. And then I would probably feel like, okay, I'm like too much of what drains me is being required of me in this process if I can't like outsource it in any way. Because when I focus too much on the SI stuff, I just lose my like energy and ideas. So I think that if I were trying to work towards a mutual goal that kind of required me to tap into those inferior functions, that would be very difficult. And it's like the friction can also happen in the introverted feeling. So it's like in my household growing up, like there was almost like an ideological split in my household in terms of religion. And by almost, I mean very clearly one. Like I identify like more like agnostic, we'll say, but for, you know, during my teen years, very firmly, like staunchly atheistic. And my dad was very religious and we would go at it. Like it was like the like both of us having that FI value and having it be pretty like high enough up in our stacking, him being like, you know, older and having developed that, and me being like someone who's moving into it as a teenager. It's just like the lack of seeing eye to eye was a very big problem. And it doesn't have to be. Like, I think it's like you can easily be diplomatic with members of like your you know, opposite type, but like if you're not, and if there are heated issues in the way, like it can get really intense.
Yeah, friction, I guess, between me and ESTJ. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously more go with the flow, and I'm slower to do things. I like to think a lot first, really mull things over, and then make a choice. And I think ESTJs are more, obviously, they're very action oriented and want to get things done. And I feel like maybe some friction would be just like having to do with that, like me being a bit slower, ESTJ wanting to act. And also, yeah, in my experience working with ESTJs, yeah, I mean, sometimes I find like the TE a bit harsh. I don't know, like because I'm obviously FI focused, and in the past, I mean, I don't think that they meant it this way. I think this was me taking it personally when I was younger. I used to think ESTJs thought I was just like kind of stupid or illogical. I don't think that they thought that. That was just me taking things personally. But yeah, that's I guess that's where some friction has been in my experience.
Yeah, I find FI to be something I understand, but if we don't end up sharing the core values with it, it's not like surface level is all we're going to get to. Like, and then the other things I find is sometimes when they finally go into action over doing something, they're so particular about the way they want to go into action that I'm like, hey, can I help you? And they're like, no, like, I want it done this way. And I'm like, I will try and do it your way. And they're like, no, but if you like slightly deviate, even though I explained it to you, like, it's all ruined. And I'm like, really? Like, or there's other times it's like we have things to do and their sense of timing for doing things can be just so very off, you know, from mine, you know, that it's like, okay, our sense of timing and getting things done is just very different, you know, as far as, you know, when we were expecting to have it done or how quickly we're doing it, or we're both trying to make it out the door at the same time, but we have different senses of interruptions or, you know, things that, you know, we like, I put off things to the last minute, but I know how long they'll take. He just keeps going with his projects. And then like, I think it kind of hits a, oh, I'm going to be late button. And then he's frantically trying to get out the door. And I'm like, dude, can't you hit that like 5 minutes earlier and you can read a book once we get there if you really don't want to talk to people? As opposed to, being this late, it's a different sense that way of things.
I had kind of a light bulb moment while you were talking about when you said like, if we share kind of a common thing. I think if like the FITE axis lines up, like you're working towards a common goal that's kind of where you both understand both the timeline and the meaning behind it, members of like R4 type can all work very well together. But I think if you're misaligned on either of those, it just goes really badly. And I remembered while you were talking, I have worked with an ISTJ and I drove her crazy. Because having TE, I think before SI, I'm always like, okay, I see the end goal and I know like I'm going to produce something that gets good results and it's going to be on time. Like it's not going to be late to the point where like it impacts the results. But as long as those things are met, that's like, I'm like, everything else is like, will just happen when it happens. So we would agree on dates. And then like, sometimes I'd be like, I did this 2 weeks early. Other times, like I did it at the last possible minute. Drove her, and I know I drove her nuts. And the whole time it was like, oh, sorry, but it's very difficult for me to not operate that way, which isn't an excuse, but it's like, yeah, I can definitely see that being an issue in terms of like where TE lies in relation to the SI and also like FI. Yeah, it's just like, if you're aligned, it's good. If you're not aligned, it's bad.
Yeah, because the bluntness doesn't have any sense of compassion if your FI is not aligned. Like it's just like I don't care. Like, if our FI is not aligned, I'm like, sorry, my basic sense of morality, the stuff I would give to everybody is still here. Any special place in my heart, special priority for you as opposed to every other human on the planet. If our FI doesn't align, that's so hard for me to give that priority to you without having that in alignment.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah.
And I do think that side of, I think ENFPs and ESTJs, because TE comes before SI for both of us, like it's the final execution of it that concerns us more.
Yeah.
Where I think for both INFPs and ISTJs, because SI comes first, they've got this sense of we have these other things in the middle of it, the process of it that we have to get right. And then the end result will come, but after we get all this process stuff right. And I'm like, no, the end result was good. If the end result wasn't good, then we're going back to fix the process. And I think those two do it the other way around. They're like, no, I made the process good, therefore my end result's good. And I work backwards from that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's
I cannot relate more to that. I actually, when you guys were talking about that, I was thinking about experiences with my ESTJ manager, and I just remember like I was too focused on the process, and I was like, no, it has to be this certain way, and like this is the way we said we would do it. And then because I was too caught up in that, the timing, and I have TE last, the timing got messed up, and it's not getting completed in a timely manner. And then I realized after that person just wanted it done. Like they just wanted to get it done. It's like the way in which you get it done is like it's secondary to having the completed project. So yeah.
And we just got Ryan to lean forward, so he's got something on his mind.
I don't know. When I think of the process, it's like if it isn't done right, what's the point? And I think that's my SI at the top going, this is how it's supposed to be. Any deviation from that means it didn't turn out right. So get the process right first, and then you can get consistently good results at the end. And I drive Mara nuts with that when I'm working with her, because as an ISTP, she doesn't understand that at all. Because she's like, this is not a one-shot deal. I'm like, yes, it is. Everything is a one-shot deal. It's like, I just want to do it once. Just once.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's also possible to relate this back to a dichotomy difference too. So introverts in general are known for being more cautious with execution, in the sense that like they want to kind of perfect something before acting, whereas extroverts just like to go first. So it seems to also be the case here as well. And so let's return back to Ryan's cognitive function stack. So how is your experience of extroverted intuition, Ryan? I mean,
You're going to talk about NE or FI?
oh wait, sorry.
There's too much TE in this call. The process has to be followed properly.
This is a social experiment. I'm purposely mixing it up to see how you would react.
Like, did she do that on purpose or did she do that on accident?
Okay, so Ryan, could you tell me a little bit about your experience of FI, introverted feeling?
To be completely honest with you, FI is something that I like don't even think about like at all. It's just like literally just sitting somewhere in the back, and it kind of only comes out when pretty much I have these points where I go, this is the way it is. This is the way I am. Take it or leave it. I don't care. That's pretty much like FI to me just feels like my I don't care button. It's just like somebody trips over my FI and I'm like, I don't care. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you're saying. This is the way it is. And that's all there is to it. And that more or less just, I mean, there's obviously other stuff attached to it, but that feels like the main utility that I get out of my FI.
Are you saying you don't care about using your FI, or your FI is what prompts you to not care about other things?
My FI is basically saying, I have a problem with you, or I have a problem with what you're saying, or I have a problem with what you're doing. And my FI is going, I don't care. I don't care what you think. This is how I'm doing it, or this is what's going on, or, you know, that kind of thing. It's like my, I don't care about somebody else's opinion kind of trait.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like a certainty in your own opinion and not really needing to look out to get verification. Mm-hmm.
Pretty much. It's just kind of like I exist as I am, and I'm not really interested in anybody else's input on how I am. I go to me for figuring out how I am. I don't really care about anybody else's opinion when it comes to who I am or what I believe or what I think. It's all internal. I have to mull over it. I have to come to the conclusion. You saying words at me is going to make like zero difference in the grand scheme of things. If I'm not internalizing it and processing it with my FI, it just doesn't matter.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I remember reading on PracticalTyping, your website, plug, guys, check it out. ITJs are the most likely to say, I am who I am. And it's kind of like they're more set. Like if they have an opinion on something, then they're kind of set on it, and it's harder to change their mind. My dad has literally word for word said, I am who I am.
So nice. Yeah.
Funny.
And so everyone else's thoughts on FI?
Give me a minute. There was a comment on the panel video we did that was just perfect. But I do agree with basically everything Ryan has said so far, as this is the stuff I don't have to explain. Like, it just is what it is. And yeah, I like if you, it's also tends to be my blaster reaction. Like, if you trip my FI opinions, I'm much more likely to viscerally go after you for messing with them than I am my logical TE opinions. Like, I'm actually quite a bit calmer about those. You may not think I'm calm, but I'm calm about them. I have my parents were separated, and so like they I have half siblings, and one of the things, very few things trigger me more than people going, oh, they're less of your brother or sister, you know, or something along that lines, or your step parents matter less to you than your biological parents. And like, nothing trips my FI faster in getting a rise out of me than that, you know, something like that, you know. And it's also stuff that, but let me find a quote. So if somebody else move on, and I'll find my quote and get back to you.
Okay, I lead with FI. Actually, speaking of quotes, I just finished watching, I'm in Heidi's INFP course, and there was one module where one of her guests was describing her INFP friend, and I just could not relate to it more. And she was saying, she was like, yeah, my INFP friend, she just, is walking around. She's, obviously seeing her environment, but she, is constantly bumping into stuff or dropping stuff or whatever. And she was like, yeah, it's like she was just, walking around, and then the world happened and it interrupted her fantasy. So that to me is like describes it so perfectly. Like I'm, in my FI, I'm constantly reflecting on my own feelings about things that have happened, situations I've been in. And, sometimes it kind of runs wild and I create stories about, people in my life and, fantasize what my future could be and all that stuff. So it's, yeah, it's funny. It's funny to describe your first function because you're just in it all the time. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, I don't even know, like I'm just thinking about my feelings constantly. Yeah, I would say I reflect on them a lot, and I guess I can be stubborn, but I'm also really open to feedback. So maybe that's me being a P. Yeah, that's all I really have to say. I don't know. It's yeah, like I said, it's hard to describe your first function, I think.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm already like, I don't know how I'm going to describe any.
Yeah.
Even though I literally make a living off describing any, but it's still somehow is like the least conscious one. But yeah, my FI is, I think, like similar to Hilary's. It's like when it's higher up, FI, I think, is a very fanciful function. Like it's very much engaged in like daydreams, and like I'm always kind of picturing what my life will be like or could be like, and I'm like lost in that. And that can be a really great thing when you marry it with TE, right? Because it just means like you get really good at visualizing your life and then acting on what you want to happen. Rather than like to have FI high up means you, or at least for me, like I attribute it to why I think I rarely end up somewhere accidentally. Like I always know where I want to go, and I always know what I want out of my life, and then I can move in that direction. So I really appreciate it for that. And I think, and then it's like, of course, the place where all of like my deeply held morals live, and like the things that get me really fiery live. And like having it second is kind of interesting because it affects me very strongly, but I'm also detached enough from it that I can kind of work with it a little bit more. So for me, like it comes out a lot in my work, in that like I'm constantly exploring different like kind of models for human behavior and psychology, and I can work with it in a way where I'm like, oh yeah, I can observe this in myself, but I'm not so in it that I can't like shape it in any way. So I actually really enjoy my FI. Like I kind of see it as like, okay, NE is the room that I live in. I can't leave the room no matter what I try. But FI is kind of like this room I can go into for a while and enjoy and kind of observe it, and then go out of it and then think about what's in that room and be like, okay, maybe like something different. Maybe I should rearrange the furniture next time I'm in there. So it's a lot more conscious, but it's still very, it's kind of like, I feel like that room is full of who I am at my core, like for lack of a better term. Like it's my identity is my FI. Like that's where who I am as a person lives. And I think it's funny that all of us kind of came to that at some point. Like we're always kind of like, this is the part where it's just like, this is how it is. Because even high up, it feels like that. Like my FI is like, oh, that's just who I am. And then there's like a reluctance even to go further than that because it's usually so personal for people. So it's like, I'm not going to tell you who I am, but just trust me, it's in there.
Yeah. The quote was, FI values don't require me making sense. Like, that's where I shove everything that doesn't have a logical answer. It all gets shoved over there. And not that everything FI doesn't make sense. It's just not a requirement that it makes sense. Like, some things make sense. I love my husband. I love my kids. You know, like, there are FI judgments awash in a lot of areas. But there are a lot of them I'm like, why do I do this? I don't know. I just do. And this is my FI kicking in going, yeah, I don't really have, like, and if you catch me doing something that doesn't seem logical, it's probably comes from my FI, like, to be frankly honest. And especially if I can't tell you why I'm doing it, Like, because the exception to that is I know, like with the next function we're going to talk about, any, I know when I'm playing with my any. Like that one I can tell you that like I'm just playing around over here and any. If I don't know why I'm doing it, that's FI. That's that one over there. That's the one I blame for everything. I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like I think it's the same more or less in like any position, but it's just how much you act on it as well. Because it's like it feels the same when it's higher up. Like there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, or I can even recognize like this isn't necessarily logical, or sometimes, especially when you're younger, like this is not going to lead me. This is not going to be good down the line.
Yeah, because I see that.
Anyways.
Well, I mean, my husband is like older than I am, and I see that in his FI all the time. Like he's got these very, very strong opinions, and I look at them sometimes. I'm like, and where's the logic? And it's almost like offensive to him that I asked him, where's the logic? You know, it's just like, no, don't ask me where the logic is. Ask me whether this was right or wrong. You know, like, and so I was like, okay, so how can I, then I have to kind of back up and go, how do I help you do this? How do I help you do this fight? Or like, do I give you space? Do I need to go do something for you? Like, it becomes this very tricky question of, okay, yeah, obviously this is very strongly held opinion of yours. How do we, like, and my impulse as a T user is, how do we, like, bring this into the world and do this thing, you know? And I've gotten to the point now where it's like, okay, my first question is always, are we bringing this in the real world, or is this just supposed to be something we're acknowledging and letting you live in? You know, like, which one of these is it? You know, I need to know so I don't frustrate myself. Which one of these are we got here? You know, is it the, I just have to acknowledge this exists, and we're going to sit on the couch and know this is what's going on? Or is this something we actually need to do right now? Like, or we can do, or I need to create a plan for doing, you know, type versus action.
I always find the introverted functions interesting because I just feel like there's always this element of abstraction when it's an introverted function, because I feel like half the time, even if the FI user wanted to explain to you what the process was that brought them to whatever opinion that they ended up at, like the process for FI is just like so abstract that it's like trying to ask an NI user how they got the piece of information that they got. It's like the same idea. It's like FI can't like sit here and like pull back and go, okay, well, I had all these experiences and all these experiences combined, and this is how I felt about all those experiences when they combined, and that's what created this value. It's like FI can't do that. It's just kind of like this very subconscious thing that it's like all of your life's experiences just kind of like balled up together. Mm-hmm. And then what came out on the other side was an FI value.
Mm-hmm. So that's so interesting because you're almost word for word quoting in the week coming up, because I also do emotional intelligence coaching. And so there's a week in the INFP boot camp that I'm running where we just talk about emotional intelligence. And there's one facet of emotional intelligence called self-awareness, which people tend to confuse as like the entirety of emotional intelligence, but it's one of like 16 things you have to look at. FI users tend to think when you give them that term, like, oh, I'm super self-aware, but the literal definition of it is being aware of the nuances of your emotions. Great, FI tends to have that down. But the second part is an understanding why you're feeling those and what conditions led to those. And that's where FI just fails usually, exactly like you were saying. Like, an FI, especially a high stack FI user, they can tell you everything they're feeling and in what detail and like every nuance of that emotion, but they usually can't tell you like, oh, I'm feeling this way because of these tangible things that led me to this feeling. That takes work. So that's funny because it's like, that's precisely how it is, especially when FI is high up. Like you're detached from real reasons.
Or like if he tries to explain it and like, I, you know, when I'm using my TE, I'm bouncing all over the place. I may say it wrong, stick my foot in my mouth a million times during the conversation. I don't care as long as I got it right by the end. And like for him, if he's trying to explain it and he doesn't have the right words or he stumbles, it's like he just like insulted his own FI in the process, like by, you know, like stumbling through it. And so like, it makes him very hesitant to like, no, I don't want to explain it unless I've got it perfect, and I can't quite find the perfect words. So I really don't want to try to explain it with inferior words, because inferior words just tarnish it. Or the flip side of it is, and this might be a case of I do know what has caused this FI emotion, but that's such a painful thing, or it was so great then, but it's not so great now because I'm not living through that emotion right now, that I don't want to talk about it because that was then, you know, and I either don't want to bring back the painful emotion or I can't reach that high again. So now I don't really want to talk about it now either, you know, because it messes with the ability, you know, that sense of it.
Yeah, it can like almost feel contaminating to put your FI,
Yes.
especially something that feels very close to you, like out in the world. Because if it's misunderstood, it feels so personal, especially when it's high up, that it's like, oh no, it's like having a baby and then just handing it to a stranger and being like, don't get my baby dirty, please.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just drop it.
Yeah.
Also, too, it's kind of like this has happened to me so many times where I'm like, I have, you know, I'm having feelings about something in my FI and I'm like developing like these opinions and about how I feel. And, you know, when I share it, I see, and, you know, the person I'm talking to questions it with logic. It's sort of like, it's just kind of shitty because I'm like, oh, like, I wasn't actually thinking about that logically and I thought that I was. Or like, I thought that like what I was feeling like was justified or made sense. But through sharing it, I'm starting to see like I was missing some things there. Like I wasn't really making those connections. But ultimately it's a good thing because then I get more input and then I can use that to just like grow. Like I'm, you know, but.
And sometimes I'm not like asking like to critique the FI so much as I'm just literally sitting over here floundering, trying to understand what that FI is. But I'm asking TE questions because that's how I understand better.
Yeah.
And like the fact I even asked him that way is like messes with the whole ambiance of it. And it's like, I'm like, I'm not trying to like critique your logic of how you got there. I get this is illogical. This is FI. This is illogical land. Like, this is the country of like no logic or no sense or whatever. Like, I get this. I wasn't asking you for logic. I just wanted like, you know, you can tell me it's totally random. I fell down one day. Now I hate the color purple. Okay, you fell down one day. Now you hate the color purple. That if that's the reason, that's all I want to know. I didn't want it, like, it doesn't have to make sense. I just need to know that falling down now makes you not like the color purple. Okay, that's why we don't like purple. I can move on.
So, Amy, with your FI in the inferior spot, do you find that kind of leaves you with, you don't have a whole lot attached to your identity, or is it more of like you're kind of flexible with how you're defined, or how does that kind of show up?
I steal my identity from other people's. I mean, that's what I take my identity, like what my husband is very strongly passionate about, like right behind me. This is all music stuff because I'm in his office. And if I were to turn the camera around, like this room has like a wall of CDs, a wall of files of music, you know, like we have spent an insane amount of money on like instruments and stuff like that. And it's like, that's important to me because that's what's important to him. Or like my religious beliefs, those are all, you know, in a sense, semi-dictated to me. And other people in my church are like, don't you struggle with, you know, it dictates this to you? And I'm like, no, like, I love the fact it's dictating to me because then I don't have to sit here and I don't have to go through and like ponder, you know, the depth of this. I'm just like, nope, it says this, I do that, you know, I'm done. I don't have to sit here and struggle through FI because I just simply go and rob it from other people. Like, and now it's going to be people in places I trust, but that's what I do. And I realize that's what I do with a lot of it is, and so I have to be very careful about who I'm stealing the FI bits from, you know, or they have to be pieces like it's illogical to do this, but I have enough other people being illogical with me. So I'm okay, you know, like, and it doesn't have to be like universal across like the whole world, and it doesn't have to be universal across like the whole of my country or, you know, other things. It just has to be those who are important to me. We have to be in simpatico with, you know.
This is so funny. Like I feel the exact same way about my SI, like with certain things. Like for example, so like my partner's a really high stack SC user, it's our auxiliary function, and it's like when I'm cooking, for example, I can only follow recipes. So it's like I just go on the internet, I find the best recipe, the one that's like the highest rated. And I'm like, okay, I will not veer from this at all. And she's like, okay, well, don't you want to like make it fun and like add in things and see what works? And I'm like, no, that's not fun for me. That's stressful. Yeah. It's like, I just like when it's like, if I want a good SI experience, if someone else has already gone and figured it out and I can just replicate it, that makes me so happy and it's so easy. And it's like, why would I go through the process of like dragging my inferior function out of myself if there's a way easier way to access it in a way that still gets me what I want? So it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense to me. It's just funny because it's a different function.
Mm-hmm.
So when you steal the FI bits, does that mean they become yours, or are you still like willing to just kind of let go of them if things change, or do you get kind of adamant about them after you've adopted them?
I do get pretty adamant after I've adopted them, and it takes a lot of maneuvering to get away from them because I don't really care for change. You know, in one sense of like, I don't really care for my values to change. I don't really want them to. You know, you would have to take major life events for those to change. And some of that also is, like I said, my parents divorced. My parents separated before I was 5 and then divorced, you know, about 10 years later. So like the trauma associated with all of that, I think made me very hold tight to certain things. And it's like, if I'm going to hold on to you, I'm going to hold very tightly to this. Like I'm either all in or I'm not, you know, like you're either in my flexible room where you're allowed to walk away, or you're in the, you can't walk away. Cause I joke with my husband because his parents are still married. And I'm like, if you ever like pack up and move out, I'm sticking my bags in the back of the car and that's where you'll find me. Like when you're pulling out the driveway. And he always looks at me and goes, yeah. And he doesn't quite like, I can tell he doesn't quite get it, but everybody else who has divorced parents is like, oh yeah, I get it. You know, like that's just, you know, a response that's not untypical for, you know, a child of divorced parents to have. And so I think it's just, so yeah, my FI, once I decide on something, it stays very much, this is the way it is, which is also probably why, you know, for me, changing religious structures will never happen because I've invested so heavily into my religious opinions and connected it to my FI so strongly that the chances of me going out of there, even if, you know, my religious group was to face severe persecution, like even physical persecution, you know, stuff like that, I could not change. It would, like, I would just go through it. I mean, you could not get me off that, you know, it just wouldn't happen. I'm just so invested in those aspects, you know. I told my husband, I'm like, because of the childhood divorce trauma, I said, I picked a man who, if he left our shared religion, I still thought I could be married to, and we would, you know, like we can make this work. And, you know, I've imagined what he would be like. And he's like, that is the strangest thing to have ever thought of ahead of time. And I'm like, dude, this is my reality. Like, if I'm going to be this invested in you, I'm going to make sure that my investment is sound and it's going to stay forever. And I can do the adjustments I need to make sure I don't have to deal with ripping this out, because ripping this out is just too painful, you know, because if I have to change my FI, that becomes very, very painful for me to change that. So it's like, no. I don't let anything in there that I'm not willing to die on a hill for. It's just too painful to change.
What's really interesting about that is like, that's how I feel like high FI users are stereotyped a lot of the time, but it's way more common in my opinion for like lower stack FI users. It's that kind of feeling of like, I will go down with the ship with my morals. Whereas I think for like dominant and auxiliary FI, despite it being stereotyped this way, we're a lot more like kind of how you are with your TE, where you're like, yeah, things can like I'm not that attached to my thoughts. I'm always gathering new information about what makes sense. Like for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm always gathering new information about like what I think is right or wrong and how I feel about different things. And it's like in the moment I can get passionate about stuff, and in the moment my feelings can be very strong. But 2 years later, I might have a totally different view on that because my FI is always gathering information in that realm. And like Hilary, I'm curious, and Ryan as well, like having it also in the third position, what you guys think of that.
Would you also say it's the NE higher up that's open to new information and like always like searching for more that makes it the FI?
I would say
flexible
that
too?
changes the approach. Like it's more likely that new information is going to change how I feel than let's say new experiences. Though experiences help too. But I do really think like because I have a lot of high FI users in my life. Like I just happen like I bond very quickly with like ESFPs. My partner's an ISFP. Like I'm surrounded by FI, and I really feel like it holds true even with SE because experiences will change the way that they feel. So they could have a moral, and then like if they meet enough people or are kind of out experiencing enough things that kind of contrast with that moral, they will often shift that or have a different view of it later. Because FI in and of itself, I think, is so curious. Like it's just curious about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what feels a certain way, what feels the opposite. That it's like we're more likely to just be open to that because it's more interesting to us to do that. Whereas if it's lower down, I would imagine it's like it's more of a laborious process to get into the weeds with FI.
Yeah, I was wondering if it could be like a dichotomy thing too, because like perceivers are known for because they're like I'm thinking that maybe because ESTJs and ISTJs or people who are TJs have a J in their code, judges are known for liking closure. And that means like they want their FI to have closure as well. And whereas the perceivers, they're known for being okay if things are open-ended, and that includes their FI. So when perceivers have FI, they're more likely to leave that open-ended, and maybe like in 2 years, their opinion might change. And so it's open to revision because they're kind of taking a more perceiver approach at FI.
I think it also depends on how much refined the FI topic. You know, if they spent, like my husband, there are some topics where it'd be very hard to get him to move because he spent so long thinking about that topic and thinking through all the potential possibilities of it that he has come up with a very refined, multifaceted, multi-situational answer to everything on this topic. And so getting him to change on those ones, it's like the occasional times where somebody has actually managed to present him with new information on those topics, which is very rare, you know, on these topics. It can literally take months for him to absorb that new information because it's like reorienting his whole world outlook, you know, on some topics. Not all topics, but there are some topics for him where it's like, no, I'm almost having to reorient everything. And it can take a very long time for him to reorient everything. And that's one of, like, I'm trying to tell other people about FI is, you know, if you run into one of these people, or TI also does this, is you have to wait for them to integrate that information. And you may have to wait a very long time. Like it could be 3 seconds, it could be 3 minutes, it could be 3 years before they really integrate that new information enough to come back and say, I've made an adjustment to my worldview in this particular area. And otherwise, outside of that stuff that he's thought forever on, he's pretty flexible, you know, like you described, Heidi. But in those topics, it's like, it's very hard.
There's an important note in there, which is almost, it's like, if it's coming externally, I can very easily just be like, I don't care. Like if this is something that conflicts with my FI and it doesn't feel like there's a reason for me to challenge it or to take that opinion into account because the way I'm doing things is working perfectly well for me and it's not hurting anyone, then that just get discarded. It can never change, right? It can go for the rest of my life without changing. But there will always be a personal drive individually to like go explore. And I'm much more likely to change what I think about something or how I feel based on like if I chose to take in that information on my own and you know, digest it kind of thing.
That's all very interesting because it's in those ways that it seems like the TI and the FI dominance kind of start to align, only with like different material. Because TI is kind of the same way, only it's with like more analytical information. Like working with Mara, she's like the same way with like a piece of like technical information. I have to give it to her, and she has to like sit there and chew on it for like a week. Like, I can't just get an answer out of her. She's got to like chew on it, and then she's got to come back with this very, very thought out opinion on whatever it was that I handed her. And FI is doing like, it seems like High is doing the same thing, but it's probably more with like the emotional data or the data that's like more personalized. Because with TI, it feels like it's a lot less, it's like more impersonal, it almost feels like. But then with the FI, it's more like the personal stuff.
Yeah, I like to say it's like T and F use like T users use like a true false statement to describe, you know, what we like, where F users tend to use more of a right wrong, at least in the connotations of the English language, you know, type answer to it. So, you know, you never want to end up on the wrong or the false side of things. You want to blend on your true and your right, but true and right aren't necessarily the same things. And that's where sometimes there's confusion about. And so that's where it's like, okay, this is what you feel is right. I've got to respect this is what you feel is right, whether you're an FE or FI user, because that correlates to you the same way I would say something is true. Like, this is a truth, you know, the same, which a TI user would come back probably with the same type of answer of this is the truth. They're like, and lay it out that way.
Yeah, and with the FI, I feel like the higher the FI goes, the more focused it is. So it's the FI in the higher positions almost has like this constantly evolving kind of thing that does.
Yeah.
So I feel like in the lower spots, the reason why you brush up against that, you hit an FI and it's like, no, this is not changing. It's because in the third spot and the fourth spot, it's like, once I've got that FI there, and I'm like, okay, I got to figure it out. I don't have to think about it anymore. And I don't want to think about it anymore. I just want it to sit over there and be what it is, and that I don't have to put any energy into it. But I feel like with the FI, like FI dominance, like I have a couple friends that are FI dominance, and it just feels like it's like their primary focus is always kind of rudimenting on that this is what's defining me kind of thing. So there's more of an evolution in that. It's like they're not the same person that they were 2 years ago kind of thing. But it's not like it was all of a sudden overnight change. It was as they kept going over it and over it and over it, there were these adjustments that they made, and then 2 years later, they're in a completely different spot. They never were in a position where they never held really strong to whatever the FI valued at the time, but it's just the evolution of the FI values is just happening, I feel like, a way faster level when it's higher.
I think the only exception to that is if FI DOMs who have found their passion area respond differently than FI DOMs who haven't found a passion for life. You know?
I agree with that.
Yeah. FI DOMs who haven't found their niche purpose for life are far more flexible than those who have found it. You know, if they feel like they found their thing, then they become a much more, in a sense, rigid personality than the other ones are. You know, because the other ones, sometimes I feel sad for them because they seem to me like they feel like they're lost, like they know they're missing something. They know they haven't found their use for their FI yet, you know, what they're going to build their lives around, which as a TE user, I don't have to have something to build my life around. I will just use whatever I've got around me to build a life. I don't have to have that, you know, absolute driver, you know, that I'd be lost with. I will just make my life out of whatever's around me. You know, you could shove me in a totally different situation. I'm just going to make life happen, you know, where I think, you know, my husband has struggled with, he has changed career fields, moving around, and it's very frustrating to him when he does, because he's like, I had a career in a field that I loved, and now I'm having to do this other career, and it's just, you know, and that was his passion, because he did it not just at work, he did it at home, you know, and everywhere else in between. And it's like, and so watching him struggle with, okay, this is what I really love, and I can't, it's a very different thing. And I've also seen talk to those who are like, I don't know what it is yet that I want yet, you know, out of things.
And I mean, I feel like, and Hilary could probably speak to this, I feel like when they don't have something to focus it on, like say the FI's passion is music, so then the FI's focused and pouring a lot of energy into that. I feel like when that's lacking, it tends that they end up doing a lot more inward. So they'll be circling a lot on like their values, just generally speaking, if they don't have something external to like grab onto to say this is my passion. I don't know if that sounds right to you, Hilary, or
Yeah, I feel like I fall more into the category of like an FI user who's still trying to find their passion. Like I think that that's sort of been my journey. Like I've done, not that your career has to be your passion per se, like you be passionate about your hobbies and other things, but for me, I've been sort of going from job to job, trying to figure out what I want to do. So I feel like, yeah, I haven't found that one thing where I'm like pouring my, heart into it. But so yeah, I relate. I would say I am more flexible. Like I don't see myself actually as a stubborn person. Like I'm sure on some things I am, but I'm pretty like open to changing my mind. If anything, I feel like I need to be a bit more making it, deciding on my opinion. I feel like I'm almost like too open to feedback. So, and I just hold a bunch of opinions at the same time, and I'm not really sure which one I feel the most strongly about a lot of the time. But yeah, I definitely relate to what you guys were saying about like I don't feel like set in any opinion, like because I like exploring my feelings and my values, so it's like I welcome those opportunities when I'm challenged, to be honest. Like sometimes it doesn't always feel good in the moment, but then I do like reflecting on what people tell me, and then seeing if I can integrate that into my life. I don't know if that answers your question. There's a lot that was said, so I'm still processing. But
very typical.
To be honest, like we're gonna talk about any after this, but for me, I don't know if other INFPs or FI users feel like this, but I don't necessarily feel the need to use my FI like for a passion or a career. Like I don't know. For me, I much rather use like my NE because I really enjoy work in a group. Like I love being on a team. That's my favorite thing. So if you look at my past jobs, I've always chosen jobs where I'm on a big team where I can support people and, I know where I am in that team. I don't like being the leader, but I like being an integral part. So for me, like when I'm being an extrovert, I'm using my NE, right? And I'm being creative and I'm, so that's what I like to use at a job. So I don't feel like, for me, FI is like this private thing that I share with my friends and I do on my own. Like I don't need it to be in my career or like attribute it. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I think it's kind of like the description of ESTJs. Some people are work hard, play hard, and some of us are work hard so we can have fun and be lazy. Like there's two versions of us, in a sense. And I think there are two versions of INFPs sometimes. There's the I am searching for my purpose, and they've either found it or they've not. And if they've not, they're very unhappy. And if they found it, they're going for things. And then there's the flip side of it, more like what you're describing of yourself of, okay, that's, you're more your NE, you're more helpful, you're more, group working with others, more malleable about everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think I still struggle with that. Like, I mean, like Heidi knows I've talked to her about this like over the years, but like I've wanted to find like a purpose, a passion like that, like really bothered me for a long time. That I haven't found something yet that was like really what I wanted or felt very strongly about. But yeah, so I think that's still in me, but I feel like, I don't know, I get more out of just not focusing on that so much. I don't know. I think it's also too like maybe I engage with my FI a bit too much, and I need to engage with my NE more. And because I think when you're like, you can't, if you're not getting enough input, you're not going to learn, you're not going to grow, right? So maybe I'll find that passion through just being engaged in my FE, or no, sorry, my NE more, and trying more things. Like I feel like sometimes I don't do enough because I'm always mulling over my FI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, super interesting. Ryan and Amy mentioned about how like STJs kind of like have a set and forget mentality with FI sometimes, like some of them, in the sense that like you come up with it and you kind of stay true to it. For NFPs, I have an NFP friend. He's an INFP, and he told me that his favorite thing that he could do like all day, every day is like talk about hypothetical moral dilemmas and just like understand his stance on those hypothetical moral dilemmas. And it's like, yeah, like that's juice to the NFPs.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah, they're more exploratory with their FI. Like Ryan was saying, evolving their FI with these hypothetical situations.
And I almost feel like because the FI, it feels like the FI when it's higher is encompassing more things. I feel like there's a tendency that there's more stuff in there that's kind of, oh, well, it's take it or leave it kind of thing, so it makes it look more flexible. Whereas when it's lower, I feel like when you do hit it, it's those core things that are like, no, this is the one that's not going to change kind of deal. Because, I mean, in day-to-day life, honestly, I don't really hold a ton of really strong opinions. Like somebody asks me, well, what do you like to do? Or what do you want to do? Where you want to go? Where you want to eat kind of thing. I'm usually like, I don't care wherever you want to go. It doesn't matter that much to me kind of thing. And it's like frequently I find that dealing with somebody else who has a stronger opinion that doesn't get their way is more trouble to me than getting what I want. So it's like on the scale, it's like my highest priority is just for things to be fine.
Yes.
And then secondary is what do I have to do for you so you make my life fine? So you're not disrupting my life. And then after that, then comes my preferences. So usually my preferences are kind of getting put away so that my main preference of things just staying steady gets accomplished.
Yeah, very much so. Like I told Joyce in the solo video, I'm like, things to watch out for as ESTJ is how many intuitives do you really want to be taken care of? Like as an ESTJ, some ESTJs may be fine taking care of a lot of them. Other ones may be like, I really don't want to take care of all that many, because it feels like that sometimes after a while. Like you're taking care of things for them. And I'm like, I love my INFP. I will gladly take care of mine. And I will take care of my children. But there's only so many of you I really want to take care of and be responsible for at the end of the day. Because there's only so many of you I can please and make fine so that everything's cool on my side of the over here. If you really don't care, that's fine. I will do what I want. But if you really, really do care, would you please tell me? Because it really rocks my boat if you didn't tell me and then now you're unhappy. That really causes a lot of waves in my world. Like, I know the phrase, and it's not the greatest of phrases, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. That's not our house. It's if daddy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Because that FI, I can be pretty flexible in a lot of situations, but you trip, like he really wants something and we didn't do it, that becomes a little bit more of an issue sometimes, or in my opinion, a lot more of an issue, because I'm like, I just need to know, I can adjust, but I need to know. please tell me.
Yeah, and I think that's really where the difference between the ESTJ and the ISTJ kind of comes in, because honestly, my first instinct when dealing with somebody that's doing that is to detach. If I can from that person, I'll just detach from the person and be like, you're not worth dealing with. So, and then I just won't deal with them anymore. So the ones that I have to deal with, like family and close friends and stuff, those are the ones that I have to make room for. But it's like, yeah, if you're not if you're not up there in the FI importance, I'm probably going to detach before I'm going to be amenable.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting because even having FI and IOP, I relate to what Amy was saying. Like if it's my inner circle, so if it's someone I work with, or if it's like my partner, because we live together, right? It's like if there's something going, like I can see something's kind of going wrong in the FI. I'm like, I need to know right now. I need to know what's happening. So if you just need space, that's fine. But just tell me so I know how to deal with this situation so it doesn't become a worse situation, right? But if it's someone who like it doesn't really affect my life that much, whether or not they're happy, it's like I can just give it space. That's fine. But yeah, if it's gonna become a bigger problem if it goes unaddressed, then it's just easier to like immediately be like, okay, what's going on in the FI and how do we work with it?
Yeah, that totally, I totally get that. Like, actually, I don't have anything further to say.
Yeah, I would say, and the thing is, my husband, like, if we don't acknowledge those FI strengths, and then I'm like, hey, why didn't you tell me? He feels so miserable afterwards. Like, he feels so guilty that he didn't tell me in the first place that this was important. You know, afterwards when I come to him and say, hey, I wish you would have told me this. We could have made this better. And then I've almost learned not to say that sometimes because that becomes a different kind of guilt trip to him of, oh, I didn't, like, you know, I didn't tell you, like, now I screwed it up. And it's like, that wasn't the point of this conversation. Like, at all. Not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation was just, I need you to be a little bit more forthcoming with, like, you don't explain the FI. Just tell me in whatever simple TE terms you can come up with what it is. And we can go from there.
That's so funny because I feel like it's, yeah, like, I mean, I lead with FI. I've been there many times where I want someone to, you know, guess what I'm feeling and you know, ask me and like, so we can solve it. And it's like, I feel like, yeah, I mean, like you have to communicate, you know, your needs, right? It's like people can't read your mind. But I think with FI, you know, we're constantly creating like narratives in our head about how the way we want things to go. And
Narratives is a good word for it.
yeah, and there's these stories, right? And it's like because like it's first, we're just like swimming in it. You know what I mean? It's like that's where I'm living, and it's like, you know, I do that all the time, and I know that I'm making it up. Like I know this is like a fantasy I'm creating, but that doesn't always stop me from being disappointed when it doesn't happen. Like it's just I don't know. It's a weird function like that. So I think that's where like there can be some frustration because then the person leading with FI is, you can tell something's off with them because something's not going their way, but they don't want to share it because it's their precious FI and they this beautiful story, and now you're ruining it for asking what's wrong. How dare you? Like the story, and you're not participating in the right way. And it's like, look, yes, that's how it is. And it's like, but I think like a really like a healthy way to be is to, you know, be like, okay, I'm having my fantasy. I can still do that, but I can't expect this other person to know what that is and just do it. And like this is another person that is real, that exists. Like, and I'm making something up in my brain. That's like,
or, you know, or the other one, I feel sorry for them sometimes is to realize the answer is just simply, I'm in my FI fantasy, leave me alone.
yeah.
You know, it's like, no, really, you don't, like, if you don't want to explain any of this, you don't need to. Just tell me, sit on the couch next to me and chill. Like, if that's all you want, that's how you want me to participate in your fantasy land, is just sit here or go take the kids on a walk or, you know, like, whatever, you know, like, I don't have to actually participate as long as I'm not interrupting, you know, like, it's okay to tell me, you know, just get out of my hair, you know, that's fine. That's words I understand, you know, like, that's all good.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you guys get bothered when you've been like mischaracterized or somebody got the wrong idea about you?
It depends. There are some things I don't care about, but there are some things I'm like, really? Like, I wasn't obvious enough for you to figure this out? Like, pretty open book stuff like that. So when like people mischaracterize me, I'm like, dude, like, are you blind? You know, like, what did you miss here? You know, okay, would you stop inferring things? Because there was nothing to be inferred here, you know?
That's
So
very
that kind of drives me nuts.
I feel like it depends. It's a hard question because it's like it depends who and why, and does it matter? Like it's like I think sometimes there can be also perception with like high FI users. Like I can be so self-absorbed, right? Like I'm fascinated by myself. So I think sometimes that exploration, people assume like, oh, like Heidi really wants to be understood. But it's like I don't really care if I don't know you and you don't affect my life at all. If you think something of me that's inaccurate. If there's no consequence to that, it's like whatever. Everyone's entitled, like in my opinion, everyone's entitled to their personal construction of me that's in their head.
Yeah.
That's their FI. Cool, go with it. But it's like if it's causing a problem, then that's a problem. Or if it's in some way messing up with my fantasy I'm having about myself that someone else thinks of me a certain way, that will bother me. So if it's someone I'm close to and it's like I think that they're not understanding me, and I'm like, well, in my brain we have this relationship where we understand each other. That'll drive me crazy, and I'll like need to sit down and like clarify it.
I have an ENFP best friend, and basically, I misunderstand her like sometimes, right? There was this time I remember very vividly, and I misunderstood her, and then she was like, she sat me down and she's like, no, you have to understand like why I did this, like because I wasn't getting what her intention was. And so I'm really close to her too, and so she needed me to understand her FI. And there have been times like she wrote me a birthday card and she wrote, "You're irreplaceable," and my first thought was like, no, I'm not. And so I told her, and then she got so offended. That was the most offended I've ever seen her, and it's because I told her that her emotion, she was like, it wasn't as true as it was. So basically I've had FPs in my past, like I'll misinterpret their emotional intent, or I'll misinterpret like what they meant by that emotion. And if they're close to me, like it can really hurt because they're like, no, you are irreplaceable. Like, so I remember, the reason why I remember that is because if someone questioned my emotion, like I said something like, I don't know, I'm feeling happy or sad or whatever emotion. And then someone was like, no, you're not, Joyce. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm not. Like, that's my FE response to it. So I remember feeling so weird that she would feel like sad or upset that I misinterpreted her emotion, because if someone said that for me, I would react totally differently. And so, yeah, good question, Ryan. I can see what you're getting at. Anyone else want to comment on it before we move on to Ryan's last function?
I was just gonna say, like, this doesn't really bother me anymore, but I feel like this is just like my INFP like ness coming out when I was younger and wanting to be like unique and special. But like sometimes I would get the impression that people would like just think I'm like an ISFJ or something, like I don't know, based on like maybe the job I'm doing or like, you know, how I'm maybe acting in that moment. But like I don't know how to describe it. Not that there's anything wrong with being an ISFJ. I'm just saying like they would just think I'm a certain way, but I wasn't. And for some reason that would bother me when I was younger, but I feel like now that wouldn't bother me as much.
Yeah, I feel like it's actually probably harder for INFPs because you guys are so in your head with your FI that like you can get, like, I think you get mischaracterized more often. Like even like between you and I, I've seen that happen more. Like people like will make assessments of you where it's like, oh, that's not what's going on behind the scenes kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Where it's like when you're an extrovert, because you just kind of talk more, like it happens less. Like it's like I'm constantly telling people like what I'm thinking and what's going through my head, and if someone has a mischaracterization of me, I'll just like explain what's actually happening. So it's like I think it happens more often to INFPs probably.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, it doesn't really bother me a ton because I tend to live by kind of a I am what I do kind of mentality. So it's like, so you know how I am because of what I am doing. So if you're trying to mischaracterize me, it's going to come out and people are going to see that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because I am acting the way that I'm acting. So that is me. Like, I don't know what to tell you. They told you something else. It's like, well, am I like that or am I not like that? I mean, it gets annoying when it doesn't logically make sense. When somebody is trying to basically say, like if somebody tried to basically sit there and say that I wasn't organized, I'd kind of look at them like they were crazy kind of thing. It's like that might bother me a little bit because I'm like, I don't know how you ever got to that conclusion or what observation you made that brought you to that place, but it's not right.
There's actually like a moment where I feel like, oh, that like ISTJ, ENFP, the ways in which we run parallel feels really strongly for me because like I have like one of my kind of core things I always come back to is like character shows itself in time. So it's like if someone's making any sort of judgment on you or like something that's truly wrong, it's like you don't really need to worry about it because people can just watch you and find out whether or not that's true, right? Like something can seem untrue in one instance, but if you watch someone consistently over a long period of time, you can more or less work out like what kind of a person they are. And so it's like, it doesn't need to be something that you panic about. It can just be like, well, you know, if they're really invested in finding this out about me, they'll see, like they'll know.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if it has to do with the thinking and the feeling functions being sandwiched in the middle, but just like flipped on each other, because it kind of feels like the FI and the TE are kind of playing off of each other in that way. It's like, well, the FI is coming out through the TE, so you'll see the FI, so you'll know in time whether it's right or not kind of deal.
Yeah.
I would say most of mine end up being, I rarely have guys misinterpret what I'm doing. That very rarely happens for me. For me, it almost always happens with ladies, in particular FE users, because if I don't have like the conversation of, hey, I'm a blunt person, I meant what I said, please don't infer anything else. If I don't have to have that conversation with you, you're probably a thinker girl of some kind. Because almost every single thinker girl or feeler girl I've ever been in contact with eventually comes to me and goes, you hurt my feelings. And I'm like, what did I, okay, now I'm like, I already know this. I'm like, I already go into this conversation mode of, you're expecting this, ESFJ, ESFJ, you got ESTJ over here. And so let me explain. This is what ESTJ is. I was being kind. Please tell me I was offending you fast enough. I can fix this instead of like, you can't ever want to see me again, like type thing. So, that's usually where I run into most of mine are on some kind of that spectrum. Other than that, I don't tend to run into it too much and it doesn't bother me. So that's pretty much all of mine fall in that category area.
And so Ryan, would you like to tell us a little bit about your experience with extroverted intuition?
It kind of sucks, to be honest. Any for me is kind of like, there are these rare moments that are so wonderful where I just have tons of idea and inspiration, and there's millions of ideas that come to my head, and then I can chew on it for a couple weeks, and then it just feels like a drought for like weeks on end, where it's just like I can't come up with any interesting ideas that aren't somebody else's, and it just kind of waffles back and forth like that for the most part in normal everyday life. Or I'll think that I came up with something, and then I'll think about it for a couple hours, and then I'll realize where I stole it from. And they go, well, crap, that was not an original idea.
Yeah. Any is my playground function to have random thoughts and to join them together. My favorite description of NE, which will make sense to you guys, but drives sometimes NI users crazy, is NE is like in those, in English class, you had to do those word bubble association things. Start with one thing, go off, word bubbles, more word bubbles, all those. Okay, take that, go 3D, add squirrels. And that's usually, then that's, and any NI users are like, they're like, okay, word bubbles, okay, go 3D, and you can see them start to pause, like, as you say, go 3D, and, start connecting things from here to here. And then when I say add squirrels, that's when they're like, oh no, I'm out. Like, they're like, like, never again. And I'm like, but it's fun for me, but it does have to exist kind of like in this like box of, I've got this much box for NE. And it's fun to play in my box of NE, and it's fun to play with, like, watch other higher NE people play with it, that's fun, and I can track you and I can follow. Like, I'm not necessarily greatest always at coming up with the ideas, but I can track where you're going. Like NI users may be lost, but I at least followed your rabbit trail as you were going everywhere else. And it's fun. Or it's my desperation function. It's the function where I used SI tapped out for whatever reason, and that doesn't happen very often that SI is going to tap out on me. SI tapped out, and now I'm desperate. This was not working. I need something obviously totally new. And that's when then comes my desperation feature of, okay, how do I fix this that I have no preconceived ideas of how to get there, And that's where it's like, so it's either my playground function or my desperation function. And I always know if I'm there. Like, that's the other thing about it is, like, it's never do I wonder if I'm there, especially at my age now. It's like, no, I know if I'm in my any, it's very obvious to me if I'm in any mode, at any time. And I can pull it out whenever I want to. And I enjoy playing with it. But I also, after a while, I'm like, okay, and I'm done. Okay, back away. Had enough, or it's like, okay, those are all sorts of fun conceptual ideas. Now, how do I make those reality? And that's when I'm like, yeah, that's when I'm like, okay, and now I can tell I just ticked off all the NE dominoxes with that statement, and they want to play with me up until I do that, and then they're like, sorry, I'm done. I have to come back to my playground. Let's come play my sandbox. Okay, this one over here where we actually get this done. And they're like, and sometimes they look at me like, I didn't want to go in that sandbox yet. Like, want to play in my sandbox, and I'm like, sorry, okay.
Yeah, I have NE second. I use it when I'm interacting with other people. Like, that's when it comes out, when I'm exploring ideas with people. Like, Heidi can attest to this. We just sit there for I could sit there for 10 hours with Heidi and talk and discuss ideas and make connections, and never do anything about it. So sorry, Amy.
No, hey, I live with one of you. I know what you're talking about.
I love it. Like, I don't need to do anything about it. Like, I mean, eventually maybe I will want to, but yeah, it's sort of like the way it feels. Like, I just feel alive when I'm using it. Like, I feel energized. I feel like I just drank 10 coffees. Like, I feel like I'm excited. And I feel like personally, I don't engage with it enough. Like, I feel like there's been many times in my life where I've been stuck in an FI-SI loop, and yeah, I feel like I'm engaging with it more now in my life, but I still think there's so much more I can do with it, and I think I'd be maybe getting more done actually if I engage with it more. So I find I still do rely on SI a lot, and I mean, I grew up with my parents are an ESFJ and ISFJ, so I feel like I developed my SI a lot through relating with them, and but yeah, that's my NE. I don't know. I use it most when I'm interacting with other NE users. Like, I don't really, if I'm by myself, I don't know how to engage with it. I don't know, Heidi, if you have any feedback for that for INFPs. Like, if I'm on my own, I'm just using my FI. Like, I guess maybe unless I was writing or maybe creating something, then I'd be using my NE.
Yeah, I was gonna say my husband uses tools to do NE up by himself.
Yeah, okay.
Books or music or things like that. If he's doing it on his own, he's using some kind of surrogate, which I find the same for myself. Like, when no adults are around, I use TV and books and things like that as surrogates for other adults while I'm going about my life. So
okay.
Yeah, I would say that's all accurate to how I see both you and INFPs in general using NE is finding some sort of interactive touch point. So it's whether it's another person or a book. A lot of INFPs are really avid readers, and it's that's how they're engaging their ideas through reading about different things or watching videos or whatever the preferred learning style is. But it's usually interactive, whether that's human interaction or otherwise.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I swim in any, so it's hard for me to summarize it. But I think actually it's interesting, like what Amy said, because like the kind of bubbles, it's like that's kind of how I see it as well. I've described it to people as like, okay, so like this is how I describe it to NI users who are always like, why is your worldview not converging at any point? It's like, so I'm like a frog on a lily pad, and I can't see where the other lily pads are because it's rounded. So it's like I need to jump to the next lily pad, and then I can see the next 10 lily pads, and I choose like, okay, which one seems the most exciting, or which one seems like it's got good access to more lily pads somewhere else. And then I jump to that one, and then I reassess the situation there. And it's kind of this continual process of doing that. So it's kind of like always orienting yourself. Like NE to me is very much about context and understanding like, where am I in relation to absolutely everything else? How do I find my orientation point? And then where are the possibilities that exist from that orientation point that are unique to that orientation point? And that's also like a very useful skill once you learn to kind of rein it in and harness it a little bit. Like in my work, I use that a lot. Like, okay, from this specific vantage point, what is it that is either like close by and easy to get to, or that no one else is doing? And like, how can I kind of follow those unique trails to figure out like what's exciting down the line? So that's like kind of normal, relaxed NE that's functioning well. Then there's spastic NE, which is just like, I am like a firework that is being shot into space, and I'm just, things are breaking off, and I'm flying everywhere, and then like, generally I'm consumed in this like kind of mess of gas that's heading somewhere vaguely, and it's really exciting. I don't really know where it's going. So that's kind of like NE when you're younger as an NE Dom. It's like this very like intense, high energy, kind of intellectually frantic thing. And then as you grow up, it becomes more kind of like controlled and confined, and you can work with it more. At least like that's been my experience. But yeah, it's fun sometimes and it's horrid other times, and it just kind of depends on like your overall health and the health of your other functions. But yeah, it's kind of more or less. It's like funny because it's like when people are like, oh, NE is about possibilities, I'm like, yeah, I get that. But it's like, possibilities are my air. Like, I wouldn't even tell you my life is all about possibilities. It is, but I don't even notice myself picking up on possibilities. Everything is a possibility. Oh, and the last thing is it's very, everything is something else. So absolutely everything is a metaphor for something else. It's like when you look at like, Dario Nardi's work, and he talks about like the transcontextual brain pattern that lights up when the ENFP is like, or the ENTP is engaged with something. It's like, okay, like I have this bookend, and it's like a horse, right? But it's also 14 other things. Like this is like a metaphor for like how we care for our young. And it's also like, oh, if you put it against the books, then it's like a metaphor for how like, oh, we need to like keep things within certain limits, or else like they fall all over. And like, how could we rearrange the things internally to like make, like, it's just everything represents everything else. And that can make us very creative, again, when it's channeled. But if it's not channeled, it can be a bit of a mess and very confusing for other people.
Yeah. I said the other thing about my NE is it doesn't tend to work well unless I'm talking. For me, like I have to be talking to use it. Now, sometimes it can be, if I'm really desperate, my own internal verbal monologue. Like that can work sometimes, but NE usually works best if I'm talking at people. Another person doesn't have to say a whole lot for it, like, back, but it's almost like I have to at least be able to get I need something to bounce off of, whether it's just their facial reactions, whether it's just the sound in my ears of what I just said, as I'm using it, but I have to do it like out. And it has to be out loud, and it of some kind, like I can't do it in my head. That's my least favorite way of doing it, because that's when I usually goof it the most. Like I don't come to any answers I actually enjoy usually when I'm doing it in my head. It works so much better when it's like, okay, am I bouncing? Like somebody else is just, even if they're just sitting there going this, it works so much better for me.
Is it basically like you find that you're figuring it out literally as the words are leaving your mouth? Mm-hmm. Like I've had that happen to me so many times where somebody, it's like somebody asks me about something, and it's like, I'll give an answer, and then as I'm answering it, I'll realize, I didn't actually know what the answer to this was before I started speaking words. And I literally found out the answer as I was talking.
Yep. This is where I have to be so careful about who I'm doing it with, because I need somebody that's going to be forgiving of foot and mouth, because it's going to happen routinely. And I need somebody who's understanding of that and is not going to hold that against me. Like, because I'm going to stick my foot in it routinely, and as long as I'm not sticking my foot in it by the end of the conversation, I'm happy. But I don't want you to remember only the times I stuck my foot in my mouth every other time, or that, time I, because I'm really not paying attention sometimes to what I'm saying. And all of a sudden I use a word or a phrase that's like totally inappropriate. And it's like, and as soon as it comes out, I'm turning red. I'm frantically going, that's not like, but I need people who are like willing to hold the space for, okay, yeah, I shouldn't have said that one, like, I need the people who are going to do that for me, because if you can't do that, then you're not the person that should be involved in any conversation, because that's going to happen all the time.
I'm going to second all of that. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like, yeah, like Ennie is known as like the brainstorming type of function, bouncing ideas off of each other. I think like extroverted functions in general, they kind of talk out loud their process. Like with FE, like I kind of feel like I get to know my emotions a little more when I literally say them out loud. Otherwise they go a little unprocessed. And so I also think like on the converse, introverted functions, they do most of the processing in their head. It's because they're, like you guys were saying before, afraid of contamination. So I think like my NI is actually like the reason why I don't voice my NI insights until the end product is done is because I kind of like all the connections are made inside of me. And if someone goes inside and is connecting things, it almost feels like it's contaminating my own process of getting there. So I think all introverted functions have a resistance to contamination, and thus they do it more privately.
Totally. Yeah. I see that even like same with like my TI dominant people in my life, like one of my closest friends and also my sister. It's like you have to like they'll just kind of be like, especially when I use TE and I want objective feedback sometimes. I'm like, oh, what do you think about this? And then they're just kind of like, and I'm like, what do you think? And then like a week later, they're like, I know what I think. And I'm like, well, I'm already onto something else, but thank you.
Yeah, that's beautifully explained. And so any final thoughts before the panel closes?
I think a lot of that having to speak your thoughts thing, I feel like might be a combination between the TE and the NE, because I feel like for me a lot of times it's just like I have to put it out into the real world to make it better make sense for me. It's like it'll make a certain degree of sense in my head, but until I'm like actually like explaining it or discussing it, that's when I'll start actually getting all the pieces to like line up and make sense. Because I tend to like to bounce what I'm thinking off of other people to see if it makes sense to other people as well as making sense to myself.
Yeah.
Because I don't like the idea of being in an echo chamber of my own head.
Yeah, TE works better for me out loud too, whether it's out loud actions or it's out loud words. It works better out, in some kind of extroverted form. And it gets refined afterwards by the feedback that you get from everybody else.
Yeah. And I wonder if like FE feels the same way, but with emotional information, it's more like it doesn't want to be in its own emotional echo chamber because it wants to know how people feel. So it's like the opposite, but with an interpersonal situations. But yeah, that's so cool. Any final thoughts before we close the panel?
I really like brainstorming with any users, because it's like, I guess because mine's inferior, it feels like they're providing basically that part of me that feels like it's dysfunctional. And it's like when the ENFP that I talked about and myself got together, it's like I know a lot of stuff has to line up otherwise to make it actually work that way, because I mean, there have been other ENFPs that I just couldn't get on the same page with. So there's a lot of other stuff that has to line up. But when it does, it feels like you're literally like perfectly balancing it out, because it's like it just all clicks into pace. It's like the high NE, the high SI, and it's just like, it's beautiful when it works.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare when it doesn't.
That's me and my FI. It's beautiful when it works. When it's not,
Yeah, so when I'm aligned with an SI dominant and kind of like what they stand, like if we're on the same page with things, I feel so comforted around SI doms, because I'm like, oh, you just kind of, it's the same thing. Like this thing that I'm inadequate at and that I have to like either obsess over or completely neglect, you just always do. It's just always happening, and it's predictable, and I don't have to wonder like when things are going to happen, and that's so soothing for my inferior SI. So it's like, yeah, it's the same thing. When we're aligned, it's wonderful, and I feel totally like at ease by it. But then if it's not aligned, no, giant disaster.
I feel the same way about PE as well.
Yeah, that's so lovely. Okay, any more thoughts? I'll give it 5 seconds. Okay.
you realize you just asked a bunch of us if we have any more thoughts, right?
I'm an
That's not the question you can ever ask any people. Do we have more thoughts? Don't ask that question. Don't ask that question.
The limit, there is no bottom of the barrel. Like
Yeah.
it's a bunch of false floors. But
Yeah.
well,
Don't do that.
It's a bottomless pit, a black hole of ideas. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Then I guess I'll be the one to make the decision to close the panel. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming out. I really appreciate all that you all had to offer. Just to remind you guys, Heidi Priebe has boot camps for the INFP and the ENFP personality. I was a part of her ENFP boot camp, although I'm not an ENFP. I just love learning about type. And so something really beautiful about her boot camps is that like she has a very unique type of like coaching sessions with each of the people who enter. So it's like group calls that are pretty intimate. And you talk about like subjects like vulnerability leading questions, and like it's very unique. I've never really had that in a boot camp. Oh, I've never been in a boot camp before, but like I think other boot camps don't have that. So if you want to like learn a little bit more about your vulnerable self, or just like get to know parts of you that maybe were a little scary before, go check out Heidi Priebe's boot camps. They're very worth it. And also check out Ryan's website, PracticalTyping. Him and Mara put so much care into their articles. I like how the information on your website is so distilled. Like you take these broad concepts and you relay them in a few sentences. And you get to the meat and potatoes of what type is. And so yeah, PracticalTyping is one of my favorite websites to learn about the 16 types about. So if you have free time, which I know you all do because of the quarantine, go check out Heidi Priebe's boot camp and Ryan's website, PracticalTyping. You will only be amazed. So if you want to be amazed, go check it out. And also, Amy the ESTJ has a Twitter and she loves type. Just gonna leave that there too. And Hilary is an awesome INFP. Yeah, what more can we say? She's just great. And yeah,
Joyce. I'm
yeah,
just on social media with type. Sorry guys, but glad to be here.
Monday will get her on.
you're amazing. Yeah, and so yeah, I appreciate each one of you. I appreciate like the insights that you guys had. Like Heidi and Hilary used to room together and they know a lot about each other, and so they were really able to comment on this topic really well because of that. And Amy the ESTJ has an INFP husband and she gets him, so like that really
fodder for everything here. The poor guy, and he's not interested in it at all.
Yeah, so that really enriched the conversation. And Ryan just really knows like ENFPs in his life too. He had like a boss that was one, and he has like all these examples, and it really helps make things practical and grounded. So yeah, you each brung your little sparkle into this chat, and so I'm really grateful for the gems that you all laid throughout the conversation. All of your Ennies were really good at, thinking out loud and bringing out such good ideas to the table. So I really appreciated that. And yeah, the world is better for all that you guys offer. Thank you, audience members, for watching. You guys are splendid. It's been like 2 hours. Give yourself a pat on the back. Wow. Drink some water, walk around. Thank you for watching. Yeah, it means so much to me. And I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye, guys.